الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم يقولون آمنا به كل من عند ربنا وما يذكر إلا أولي الألباب ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا إنك جامع الناس ليوم لا ريب فيه إن الله لا يخلف الميعاد صدق الله العظيم.
تكبير. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. We thank you, Sister Rodia. May Almighty Allah be pleased with you and be pleased with all of us. We're not going to interpret every one of what she has read, but we'll read the aspect of the prayer there. It says, our Lord, do not let our hearts deviate after you have guided us. Grant us your mercy, you are the ever giving. Our Lord, you will gather all people on the day on which there is no doubt. God never breaks his promise. And it is the promise of Allah that we are going to all be here today and be blessed with the presence of our brother, Professor Jonathan Brown, who is the Al-Walid bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. By all standard, Brother Brown is one of us. He has been a Muslim for quite a while now, and but not just being a Muslim, he has studied Islam in a lot of places. He has conducted research in countries such as Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, South Africa, India, Indonesia, Iran, among other places. And in addition to that, he is also a very well-published person with a lot of books to his name, the most popular being the Misquoting Muhammad, the challenges and choices of interpreting the Prophet's legacy, which landed him in the crosshair of the alt-right movement at some point in time in the past. So we all know what it is like that when you get into their cross paths, but Allah has guided him through all those. And like I said, I don't want to take much of the time, taking the time that we are supposed to enjoy his presentation. He has some slides to share with us, so I'm going to call on the administrators to please give him the authority to share his slide. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Professor Jonathan Brown. Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
Wa alaikum salam.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. It was funny. I kept thinking, I was like, oh, well, I'm going to see this big room of people. And then I remembered, of course, that, you know, like you're all in your own homes, just like I am. So actually, it's funny you mentioned I'd been Muslim for a long time. So I became Muslim when I was 19. Now I'm 42. And then I found this just the other day, host disabled attendee screen sharing. Hey, can the host enable my attendee screen sharing? That way I can share a screen, because otherwise I won't be able to. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I just found this. You guys can see this picture of me when I was first became Muslim in college. And I've got a Bob Marley shirt that says Rastaman Vibration on it, which is pretty funny. Yeah, I think at the time I really liked Bob Marley a lot. So anyway, that's how young I was when I became Muslim. Just for your you can make fun of me if you want.
No.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm grateful to be asked to participate, especially my dear student Ibrahim, and you know, it's like I'm sure like a lot of you, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just a weirdo, but you know, it's kind of like I'm kind of torn between being exhausted and but also wanting to make sure that I, you know, contribute as much as I can to communal life, to Muslim life, and, you know, don't just kind of like fall into this defeat of, you know, feeling like, you know, the world is just so beset by problems that, you know, communal activity just falls by the wayside. So I'm glad that, you know, Ibrahim encouraged me to kind of come out of my hole and meet you all. I'm sad I'm not meeting you in person. Okay, so I made a little show. It's kind of, you know, the problem, one of the problems I have is someone asked me to speak during Ramadan is like maybe they want like a really inspirational talk, but I'm not so good at inspirational talks. I'm more good at, you know, professorial talks, but I think it should be interesting and inspiring at the same time. It's just going to be a little bit more nerdy than maybe the average Ramadan iftar speech, or maybe you guys have a super nerdy mosque and you'll love to hear this kind of stuff all the time. But I'm just warning you. It's some parts of it are very technical, but I think you'll appreciate it. So and I think you should still be able to see my face even when I'm sharing the screen. So in case you want to make sure that it's not a recording or something, you can see my face. Okay, so I'll just, you guys can all see this now, right? So fake news in Islam in the age of coronavirus. And you say, oh, so this, even my kids now have heard the phrase in the age of corona so many times that my 5-year-old came and said, in the age of corona. So clearly this is a phrase that is going to stick with us. So I'm just putting in the title of my presentation just for the sake of pertinence, right? So why did I choose this subject? Because basically, whether it's through the news or through what your friends are telling you or your family's telling you, or what you kind of hear through the social media, now more than ever, and perhaps more than most times, we are bombarded by reports about, you know, all sorts of what causes coronavirus, how do you cure coronavirus, what's happening to the economy, what's happening to the country, what did Donald Trump say, what did Donald Trump not say, you know, what is this law, like we're, you know, almost more than usual, much more than usual, we're constantly being barraged by alleged information, attributions, claims, and because we're afraid, or people are often afraid now, right? People tend to believe things, tend to forget the rules that our religion teaches us about how we are supposed to deal with information that comes to us. And so I thought that I would give us some kind of a review of some of the ways that Muslims have dealt with information that comes to them from the outside world, from the past, from others, claims being made, how you interpret what people say, how you judge what they say. And so I thought that would be a useful thing for us to do. The first thing, this is, you know, now like maybe, you know, 2 years old, but it's a really good example, and it kind of involves a Muslim community. This is by a scholar and a journalist I like a lot, and I think a real kind of hero in terms of standing up for civil liberties and kind of rule of law, especially in times when people are upset. And actually, Ron Paul is from Houston or Dallas. Anyone remember Ron Paul, Congressman Ron Paul? I can't see it. Someone has to unmute themselves. If anyone can remember, I can't remember. I know he's from Texas, because I'll tell you why. I was on the airplane flying to either Dallas or Houston, and it was on U.S. Airways. Remember U.S. Airways? It got kind of absorbed into United in the early 2010s, and I was seated in the same row as Ron Paul, and so it was a tiny little plane, and so I was talking to him. And it was right around the time that the verdict against Chelsea Manning had come out, you know, the person who had given the WikiLeaks information. And it was clear that this verdict was like meant to like get revenge on this person. And it wasn't just kind of suitable to the crime that they committed. And I remember talking to Ron Paul about this on the airplane, and then walking out of the airplane together. And he said something I thought was really interesting. He said, a law, the time when we need the law is when people are upset. So you if people are not upset, people are not afraid, you don't really, the law doesn't really need to restrain you very much, because everyone's sort of being reasonable. But it's at precisely those moments that people are afraid, that people are upset and angry, or they want to blame somebody or take revenge on somebody, right? That's when we have to affirm our commitment to the rule of law, because that's when the law saves us from our worst inclinations. So anyway, this is about the San Bernardino shooter. You guys remember this a couple of years ago? When was it, 2015 or something? And no, sorry, this is not. This is about the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. And remember when that happened? There was a lot of stuff in the news. Almost every news outlet said that the shooter, this guy Omar Mateen, was had targeted this nightclub because it was a gay nightclub, and that he was driven by this homophobic teachings of Islam and things like that. And this was just completely routinely accepted in every major news outlet that I know of, and even the ones who were being critical said, "Oh, well, this is certainly part of the case. That he was, motivated by kind of an anti-gay agenda." And what Glenn Greenwald did is he just followed the trial, and it came out in the trial, and it wasn't even contested by the government, so this was admitted by everybody, that actually this had not been part of his motivation, that he had just this nightclub was the closest club to where he was. He just sort of put in search on the Google Maps for nightclub, and he went to another place, had too heavy security, couldn't get in, and then he went to the next closest one, which was this one. And so, in fact, this thing that all the media had just assumed was true, that no one was questioning, that everyone had taken to be a received point of inquiry, actually was not true. That in fact he had not picked this nightclub because it was gay, because it was a gay nightclub. Another thing that actually came out in the course of this trial was that and in fact the judge got angry at the FBI and got angry at the prosecution, which is very rare, is that they had not divulged crucial information. So they in the trial, so what, not only did the government, of course, so the gunman himself was killed, but this all took place in the trial of his wife. So his wife was accused of being kind of his accomplice, and she was accused of that she had gone and with him to scope out the nightclub and all this stuff. And the FBI on the stand in the trial admitted, actually, we know from her cell phone data, she was never anywhere near the nightclub. She never did this. So, you really have to follow up and confirm information. You don't just assume that because everybody's saying it, even in the media, just because all the media is saying it, doesn't necessarily mean it's true. You have to dig deeper and find out if things are really true or not. Try and find more reliable sources. And this is a tradition that goes back in Islam to the beginning of the tradition, right? It's called tathabbut here. You can see tathabbut is seeking firmness, confirmation. And Muslim scholars would do what's called muqabalat al-asl bil-fara, right? Which is that when let's say you copy a book or you copy a hadith, or you back before printing presses, right? If you wanted a copy of a book, you had to make a copy of it or have someone make a copy of it for you. You would take the new book and the new copy, and you would read it and compare it to the original and make sure that they were in fact identical. So there was this obsessive commitment on the part of Muslim scholars to make sure that whenever they copied a book or took a piece of information, that in fact they confirmed that it was accurate with the source that it was taken from. Okay, and this is an extremely basic principle from all of Islamic scholarship. Whether it's the reading of the Quran, so qira'at al-Quran, how do we have the different narrations of the readings of the Quran? How do we have the text of the Quran? How do we have the text of the hadith? How do we have the tradition of law? How do we have tradition of theology? How do we have the tradition of Sufism, right? So everything in Islam depends on the Isnad. Isnad is a chain of transmission. So everything in our religion, all of our law, all of our theology, all of our knowledge of Quran, of hadith, of the Sunnah of the Prophet, it all goes back through unbroken chains of transmission to the source, to God and the Prophet. And this is very important. And Ibn al-Mubarak, Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, who was an extremely influential early Muslim scholar, his mother was Persian. His father was actually a Turkish slave. And he became one of the most influential scholars of his day. He's from northeastern Iran. And he said, very famous saying, which you'll see in almost any book of hadith, Al-Isnad min ad-din, law la al-Isnad laqal man yasha ma yasha. The Isnad is part of the religion. If not for the Isnad, whoever wanted would say whatever they wanted. And this is, and you know, when you think about, you know, sometimes we think, oh, the Isnad is just like some hadith thing or Islamic thing. And how does that help me in my regular life? Actually, think about this. Anything that you do not personally witness, so anything you do not see or hear with your own eyes or ears, anything that you do not personally experience, you are getting through an Isnad. You're getting through some intermediary chain of transmission. That might be a book. It might be another person telling you. It might be a video. It might be an audio recording, right? It might be something you're reading. Everything that is not directly experienced by one of us comes to us through an Isnad. So always we have to be asking the question, what is this medium through which this information is coming to me? Is it reliable? Is it reliable? Do I know where this information is coming from? Do I know who is bringing it to me? Has it been reliably transmitted, right? Now, there are certain things that you don't need an Isnad for. So there's one saying that Muslim scholars had, Isnad al-hikmah wujuduha. The Isnad of wisdom is its existence. You know, so this kind of thing, like if somebody says that, you know, it's good to be just, or, you know, 2 + 2 is 4, right? Those things don't need Isnads because these things are verifiable just using reason. You don't need to have a chain of transmission for them. All right. Now, this is really interesting, and I can't remember, maybe Ibrahim had to sit and listen to me tell him about this in class once, but this is a fascinating text. This is from the Sunan of Abu Dawood, right? The famous hadith scholar Abu Dawood Sijistani, who's one of the authors of one of the main hadith collections in Islam, Sunan of Abu Dawood. He's from southeastern Iran, and he died in 889 of the Common Era, 275, 889 of the Common Era. So this is very interesting. He says, Qala Abu Dawood, so Abu Dawood saying, وجدت في كتابي عن شيبان ولم أسمعه منه فحدثناه أبو بكر صاحب لنا ثقة قال حدثنا شيبان هذا حدثنا Muhammad يعني ibn Rashid. And then he gives his transmission to the hadith that he's quoting from the Prophet. Now this is really interesting. What happened? This just shows you how careful these scholars were. So in this case, A is Abu Dawood and C is this guy Shayban. Okay, so the hadith comes through a chain of transmission to Shayban, to C. And Abu Dawood says, who's A, he says, I saw in my book, so I have a book, notes I'd taken. I saw that I had this hadith, right, that I'd written down from the book of C. So he had gotten C's book and he copied it. But this is very important. C didn't literally get and read to him and say, I read you what's in my book. Abu Dawood had only seen it written in his book. He hadn't heard him read it out loud and transmit it directly to Abu Dawood. So for Abu Dawood, that means he can't transmit it. It's not reliable enough. It's not good enough. You just find something written down. You have to have the author of the book you found. You have to have that author read it out loud to you so you know you're understanding it properly, right? And so what does he do? He says he goes to his friend Abu Bakr, who he says is reliable. And Abu Bakr, Assalamu alaikum Hashim, anta ta'kul tamr. My kid's breaking his fast. This is funny. My kids like break their fast. It just means eating. So they say they're fasting, right? But then they're like, I'm gonna break my fast. So they fast until breakfast, then they break their fast. Then they fast until lunch, then they break their fast. Then they fast until they get hungry, then they break their fast. And now he's eating a date, right, Hashim? Okay, mashallah. So he goes to his son Abu Bakr and he gets him, because Abu Bakr had heard the hadith transmitted directly from Shayban. So he gets Abu Bakr to tell him, to narrate the hadith to him. And he explains that he's doing this so that his reader knows that he's getting this information reliably. Look at that degree of exactitude. Look at that rigor. It's so impressive. Hashim, bidik salam ala nas.
What are you showing them?
I'm giving them a talk. This is Hashim. Say hi, Hashim.
Assalamu alaikum, Hashim.
I suspect these people, many of them are from Nigeria originally. This may be the case. He can't hear you. Okay, he says Assalamu alaikum. Good.
Alaikum
Excellent.
salam.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, now this is another example. I love this example, and this is a terrific, especially when, you know, Muslims, sometimes they get in arguments with each other. People get in arguments at the mosque or about who said what, or, you know, which religious leader said this or that, or, you know, you can imagine this in politics, everything, you know. So this is a great example. This is from Bakr bin Qutayba. Bakr bin Qutayba was the chief judge of Fustat. Fustat was what Cairo, before Cairo was built, the city that was there before was called Fustat. It was founded by the Muslims when they entered Egypt. And so he was the chief judge there. He died in 884 of the Common Era. And he was appointed, he was originally from Baghdad, but he was appointed by the Caliph to be the chief judge there in Cairo, in Fustat, in Cairo. This report says that he was very knowledgeable about and a good debater. And then he saw the Mukhtasar al-Muzani. So he came across a book written by one of the students of Imam al-Shafi'i. So he's in Egypt, which is where Imam al-Shafi'i spent the last part of his life and where he died. And one of his students, his name is al-Muzani, and he wrote a very, very important book of Shafi'i law, which was the basis for all the Shafi'i school afterwards. So in this book, there's some points where the Muzani and the Shafi'i, they disagreed with Abu Hanifa, and they kind of criticized him. Now, so this interested Bakr, who was a Hanafi judge, and he says, this is interesting. So what does he do? He says to two of his reliable notaries. So he's a judge, right? So he has these notaries who work with him in the court. He says, okay, I want you to go to Al-Muzani and sit in his class and ask him these questions. And every time one of the issues in the book comes up where it's a Shafi'i disagreeing with Abu Hanifa, I want you to ask Al-Muzani, did Shafi'i really say this? Right? Did Shafi'i say this? And then Al-Muzani said, yes, he did. And then, only then do they go back to Bakr bin Qutayba and they say, we've confirmed everything that's in this book. And then Bakr bin Qutayba wrote a book where he tried to answer some of those criticisms. But think about this, right? So let's say somebody comes and says, oh, you know, did you hear what Ibrahim said about you? He said that you are, you know, your car is messy and you don't get it washed enough, and you know, you're generally a pretty nasty person or something like that. So, oh, I'm gonna tell when I say next to Ibrahim, I'm really gonna let him have it. Nobody says that kind of stuff about me. So what is that? How should we respond? No, first thing we do is verify. Did he actually say this? You have to verify. Did the person actually say this? You know, oh, did you hear Donald Trump said this, that, and the other? And you get upset. Well, actually, did he really say this? First, go and check if he actually said it. Always confirm what is said about what is being attributed to somebody. Okay, I think this is really interesting. It's maybe a little bit nerdy, but I thought it was a good example of the thoroughness of Muslim scholars. So this is a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, right? And Bukhari says that it was narrated to him by Abdullah bin Maslama, from Malik, from Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, who's a famous transmitter, from Ubaydullah bin Abdullah ibn Utbah, from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, anhu qala, aqbaltu rakibin ala himaran atanan. So he's talking about going up, he's riding a donkey by people who are praying, and he's talking about that event, but we don't need to get into the details. What's interesting here is, you can see here, it said this word an, this means from. From can mean like you heard directly from them, like they told you person to person, or from could mean according to. So I could say, you know, from Shakespeare. I never met Shakespeare, but from can just mean anybody. You don't have to have met them, you don't have to read, you can just, maybe I read it in one of Shakespeare's books. So this is very interesting, and you see what Bukhari does in his book, and in his Sahih, he gives many versions of this hadith, and they all have basically the same meaning. But why does he give you multiple versions? Well, look at this. So here, right? In this one here, he says, Ibn Shihab said, Haddathani Ubaydullah bin Abdullah, right? And Abdullah ibn Abbas akhbarahu. This is very important. So Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri, up here in the first one you saw, it just says from. But in this version, Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri says, he told me directly. So he includes this version so that you know that in that chain of transmission, it's not just some guy said according to some other guy. No, that guy heard it directly from this person. And also here in this case, that Ubaydullah bin Abdullah bin Utbah, he heard it directly. He says, Abdullah ibn Abbas told me. So he told me directly. So by giving you different chains of transmission, Bukhari is letting you know that every link in that chain, in that isnad, in that chain of transmission, is actually a person meeting another person, hearing from them directly. And then this is just interesting, which is that in Sahih Muslim actually gives you one of the only instances you see in books of hadith where Malik, the famous scholar of Medina, he says directly that Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri, he narrated to me. So we know that they actually met each other, they narrated with one another because Muslim gives us this evidence. Okay, so what is Bukhari doing in that case? He's making sure that at every point in that chain of transmission, you know that the person is actually met and heard that report from the person they claim to be getting it from. And this is actually, not as maybe not as obscure a concept as we might think, or obscure topic as we might think. People say, oh, well, why do I need this, person-to-person contact? I can watch a video or I can listen to a recording. But now they have software, which, if I can get enough recording of so-and-so's voice, this software can actually take that information and create speech, basically mimic speech, kind of like they do in Mission Impossible, when they're pretending to be somebody else, or they have those masks on. And some of the software now they have is like, you can, about 50% of the time, people can't tell that it's fake, right? So they can't tell the difference between the software manufacturing somebody saying something versus that person actually saying it, that person's actual voice. So we might have to rely much more on direct person-to-person verification of information and not just assume that the recordings are accurate. And there's another thing, and this is getting more and more common, right? Which is fake news. Deep fakes they're called, right? Where you actually have videos where you can, you basically have the visual version of what I just said about audio faking, right? So you can kind of create video of somebody, even their lips moving, by getting enough data about how they move and what they look like, that you can create these. So I could actually create a video, let's say, of Donald Trump saying something crazy. Well, he does that normally, but even crazier with audio and video, and it might look completely reliable to us. So we actually need to kind of think about the Islamic tradition and its focus on verifying things by in-person contact and by direct witnessing as a way to deal with some of these ambiguities. This is something that's really interesting. And it's a really important point to keep in mind, principle that Muslim scholars use, especially about important topics. Like if somebody said something that was, very offensive in Islam, or maybe would mean that they had said something heretical, right? Which is that you don't just, oh, did you hear Professor Brown said this? Oh, he must not be Muslim anymore. He must be a kafir or something like that. If somebody makes an accusation about somebody saying something, seriously bad, there is a principle. Yusalu sahibul lafzi an muradihi. The person who speaks, who said that thing, they need to be asked, what did they mean by this? So you don't just go by what someone says. You actually go and ask them, what did you mean by this? Give them a chance to explain. Maybe they didn't mean what everyone thinks they meant. Maybe they misspoke. Maybe they were misunderstood, right? And another really interesting, this is something I just came across the other day, which I thought was fascinating. Not everything is quotable, and this I think is also really important in a time or an era where everything gets recorded. So probably this talk is getting recorded for all I know, right? And someone goes, oh, did you hear what Professor Brown said in that talk? He said this, and oh wow, that's so horrible, and he must be a real jerk, he must be, bad person or something, right? not everything is quotable, especially not things you say like in lectures or in an unplanned way. So this is a famous scholar named Ahmed Zarruq, who's he's from North Africa. The famous Sufi scholar, actually, but he was a jurist, and I think he was from originally from Libya, what's now Libya. But he's buried, I think he's buried in Fez in Morocco. And he talks about how that a lot of books that are, someone say, oh, this person wrote a book, or this person wrote has a book. Actually, that's not a book they wrote. This is something that was collected by their students from their lecture notes. So let's say one of my students gets all the notes, they take notes during my classes and they put those all together and they say, Book of Islamic History by Jonathan Brown. Well, that's not really my book. That's someone writing down things I said in classes, and in a kind of unorganized or unintentional way, right? So it's not something that I've really sat down and said, what exactly do I want to say about this topic? So he says you can't use these things as basis for like quoting them or giving fatwas. You can't use these. It has to be a book. The person sat down and say, okay, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to plan exactly what I'm going to say. So think about this when you think about, kind of gotcha culture. It's like, oh, did you hear about what this person said? Oh, it's so awful. Like, all of us, if somebody selectively takes things we say, or every once in a while we're not careful about how we speak, we're all making mistakes. And so, we need to only take what other people say when they're really trying to be clear and when they're really trying to tell you what their position is on something. Okay, and this I thought was really interesting. It's a little bit racy, but we're all adults, I think, at least. And that's actually kind of the point I'm trying to make, which is that principle ليس للعالم غربة. The scholar doesn't feel strange anywhere. The scholar should feel at home everywhere. A scholar should know how the people live, how merchants work, how taxi drivers work, how people working in restaurants live. So scholars have to go out and be part of the world and understand it, and always not be afraid to interact with aspects of society, because if you don't understand society, you don't know how to guide people, you don't know how to give them answers when they ask you like questions about fatwas, because you don't have any experience with real life. So this is a case I thought was really interesting. This is a scholar named Isa Tahmani, right? And he's visiting Khorasan, which is northeastern Iran, in 242, which is about 855, 856 of the Common Era. So he visits that area, and he hears about this woman named Rahma bint Ibrahim. She's a very interesting woman. But we don't know anything about her except that she said that she had gone many years without eating or drinking because she received all the nourishment she needed in dreams. So she would get food and drink in dreams. And she wouldn't eat or drink like in normal waking state. When she'd go to sleep, she'd have a dream, and in her dream, she would be given food and drink by like some kind of supernatural assistance. So he's really interested in that. He wants to go and he's a regular Muslim, hadith scholar and jurist, but he's very interested in this and he wants to verify it. So he goes and he talks to her and he discusses these things with her. And then he asks her another question. He says, listen, are all your needs met in your dreams? Like, human beings have other needs, not just for food, not just for drink, if you know what I'm talking about. Are all your needs met? And she says, yes, I get everything I need in the dreams. And when he asks that question, she says, like, aren't you embarrassed to ask that question? Aren't you, like, isn't it kind of disgraceful for you to ask that question? And Isa Tahmani says, his response, he says, Inni la'ali uhaddith an-nas anki wa la budda an astaqsiya, right? He says, I'm going to go and tell people about you, and people are going to ask me questions. They're going to say, well, what about this? Did she get this in her dream? Did she get that in her dream? And I need to make sure that I get all the information. So you can imagine this is like a journalist who's going and making sure he asks or she asks all the tough questions, because part of their job is to provide their readers with the information that those readers want. So these are just a couple of examples of how Muslims in the past have dealt with the challenges of verifying information, how rigorous they were how systematic they were about always making sure they verified things that they were told. They weren't kind of naive, they weren't gullible, and they understood that al-hukm far' an at-tasawwur, which means judgment about something is a product of your understanding of that thing. If you don't understand something, you won't be able to make a good judgment. If you don't verify information, you will make wrong conclusions. Even your brain, you might be really intelligent, we might have excellent ability to reason, but if the information that goes into that machine isn't verified, then the machine, even if it works perfectly, will give you a wrong result. So my advice to you and to myself, sometimes I don't follow these rules, is to think about the tradition that our scholars have given us and think about how they can help us in a time when there's lots of information and claims floating around that are sometimes easy to believe because people are afraid or confused. Okay, that being said, I would love to talk more with you all, but I need to go and help get iftar ready because you know, we're all at home and we all got to pull our weight these days. So I hope that I'll be able to meet you all in person, inshallah. And if any of you have any like specific questions about this, and you know, you're like, oh, I really want to know what Professor Brown meant about this, that, or the other, and I want to ask him a question, then you can email me. I just wrote my email into the chat, brownj2@georgetown.edu. Email me and say, you know, I was in the group that you talked to in Houston, and I have such and such a question. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Enjoy your iftar, and inshallah I'll see you all in the future.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Professor Brown. And it was also nice to meet with your son. We all grew up at his age, and we also fasted like he is fasting. So when we were younger, we would fast about 4 times in a day. And then when we grew up older, it started getting broken into twice in a day. So we wish him all the best, and we thank you for coming with us. So inshallah, we hope to have you with us at some other time when we'll be able to interact with you a little bit more. But
inshallah,
so we now know what you are into, and we will find a way to tap into your wealth of knowledge. Jazakallah khair. You are hereby released and dismissed so that you can take care of your family, or that is indeed also part of your religious obligation. So my brothers and sisters in Islam, just a quick recap. I didn't tell you the topic he was going to talk about because I didn't want to take away from the thunders, but he talked to us about fake news and Islam in the age of Corona. And he is an hadith specialist. So his area of specialization is in hadith. And what he did was to emphasize to us the traditions of our predecessors in collecting hadith. That in actual fact, when we see a book of hadith, what we are seeing is a scholarly work that has gone through a lot of verification. That Isnad is a part of our religion. Establishing the chain from where you get whatever information is a part of our religion. And we have started seeing it where our children now are trying to get certification from teachers who can trace their learning straight to the line of the Prophet himself, so that they are going to be able to establish that. So he talked to us about the importance of Isnad in the religion, and he established it by giving us an example of somebody who read a book about somebody else and got a fact about it, but rather than write on the basis of what he had read, he rather went back to somebody who had a closer connection with that person in order to establish a clearer source to writing his own book. So he was now able to quote the fact that I met this person who met this person and confirmed this particular issue. So one lesson he has given us is that we should not react on the basis of somebody coming back to us with a news about somebody else. That we should always confirm that the person who has been quoted actually said what he has been said to say. So if Brother Shakir comes to me and say, Brother Ibrahim said this, before I react to Brother Ibrahim, I should be able to go and confirm that Brother Ibrahim actually said that. So one way is for me to go to Brother Ibrahim and say that I heard you said this, and let Brother Ibrahim repeat whatever he said. And then that way I can confirm that he actually said that. So he now talked to us that especially in this age and life that we are living in now, where there are a lot of computer programming that are even studying people's pattern, and you can watch a video and think that you are seeing somebody speak. But what they have actually done is to learn the mannerism of that person and put some other things into his speech. They call it deep fake, so that it now even becomes very, very important for us not to just trust everything and anything that we have heard. And it says that we should not give fatwas from collections of somebody's lectures or notes. So when somebody is giving a lecture, it does not mean that every word he says in that particular thing is quotable or is something that we should hold him responsible for. But that if the person actually wrote a book and put it out, then somebody who wrote a book and put it out might be able to now defend whatever it is he says. So those are some of the information that I was able to get from his discussion, and we will open it for discussions amongst us or for questions. Of course,